Welcome to Blue Talks.
Well, it's great to be here today. My name is Randy Mortensen. I've been recognized as a global keynote speaker, a published author, and a business strategist. Some people will also ask me, well, what's your background? And I will usually say, well, I have a background in finance and energy, and there's enough evidence to convict me of being a serial entrepreneur. And so what I'd like to share with you today over the next 18 to 20 minutes is just some of the wisdom that I've gained, and I've put a title on this that is the 5 R's that represent great leaders. The 5 R's that represent great leaders. Leadership today isn't just about skills. It's about character, consistency, and connection. And yes, I know those are C's, not R's. Character, consistency, and connection. So where I want to just kind of jump into this with is to talk about some blind spots that we as leaders in companies, organizations, sometimes don't recognize. A blind spot can hinder your success. A blind spot can hinder your greatness in building your organization. So one blind spot that I've recognized in others is not noticing the emotions of your team members. You know, when you're not consistently monitoring the behaviors of your team members and their emotions, that means you're essentially disconnected from them. Some people will also ignore feedback. No matter whether they have 4 people or 400 people on their team, that feedback can be very, very valuable as you're looking to build and grow your organization. But sadly, some people will actually ignore the feedback instead of listening more closely. I've also observed individuals in leadership positions that think that they're the smartest guy or gal in the room, which they then have a hard time defining roles and responsibilities, and that now provides conflict in their desire to be the great leader. The other blind spots can be that they forget the value of having other people on their team. So when you don't realize the value of that person on your team, that will definitely create a blind spot, and it will restrict your ability to grow in your leadership skills with this team. Another thing that I like to point out is it's imperative that you practice what you preach. If you're that person that says, well, I have high values of character, high values of integrity, I want to be trustworthy. If you're saying that, but now your behaviors are causing you to live out something different than that, that's where I say, practice what you preach. And I like to drive that home to leaders who are trying to grow. And another restriction that I've seen in the past too is that the leaders who believe they're the smartest person on the team, they have a problem delegating to others on their team some of these tasks. So here's what I'd like to ask you a question. That question is, have you ever had this horrible boss? Now, be careful, because if your boss is in the room, don't raise your hand, don't nod your head, but have you ever had that horrible boss where you didn't want to emulate him or her no matter what? I'll give you an overview of one of my bosses who was a horrible boss. His name was Keith. Keith called me into his office one day and he said to me, Randy, you have to cut your commission plan. And I said, why? He said, well, the problem is two, maybe even 3 of your team members are making at least twice as much money as I am as a CEO. And I thought, okay, that's not my problem, that's your problem, right? But he didn't want our salespeople who are crazy successful making twice as much money as him. He didn't value our team members. Another time, Keith called me into his office, and it always made me, I always had sweaty palms whenever he called me into his office because I wasn't sure whether he was going to fire me or encourage me or what. But this time when he called me into the office, he said, Randy, you have to slow down your sales. And I said, okay, I have to slow down the sales. Why? He said, because we're getting too much cash flow. And I said, okay, we're getting cash flow, and now you're telling me it's too much cash flow? He said, we don't have the ability to manage all of the money that we have in our accounts. He said, so you got to slow your sales. I will just full confession, I did not respect that, and we just kept growing, basically. And we were able to grow that business after it was acquired by this $70 billion gas and electric utility. The first year we had built that energy conservation company, we did 600,000. Second year we did 10 million. Third year we did 20 million. Fourth year we were at a 40 plus $1 million run rate. By year 7 and 8, we had grown that company to have 8 offices, 400 people in it across the United States, and we were running at $130 million a year in revenue. That's great growth. I'm not saying I was the rock star leader, but I was far better leader than my CEO was, for sure. So let's look at maybe if we're sitting on the other side of the table. So this is the bad side of the table. Now we have a good side of the table. And that person who's genuinely caring about his or her team members, that person who truly is responding and listening to their request and then responding to their request, that's the person who's going to grow that company. That's the person who's going to have success. So when we think about leadership, I like to have people ask themselves the question, am I being that person that I want to be 5 years from now? Am I exhibiting skill sets that I want other people to follow? And will we be in a positive position 5 years from now? So as I've kind of highlighted a couple of examples of leadership skills, let's jump into the 5 R's. The 5 R's that represent great leaders start with reflection. Reflection means, how do we offer feedback? How are we listening? I like to teach that life is far better when you're talking 30% of the time and listening 70%. Life is just better when you're listening at least twice as much as you're talking. That's where reflection is really played out. When you're listening and you're reflecting, when you're asking questions and people are giving you feedback. Relationships is the second R. It's all about who respects you, who do you respect? Those sorts of relationship building tools are vitally important. The third one is resilience, and resilience happens to be my word for 2025. As I look to thrive in 2025, my word is resilience. And that's one of my 5 R's for this formula. Then is responsibility. And then when you look at those 4 R's, and I'll show you an equation in a minute, what does that deliver? It delivers results. Doing that is going to deliver the results. And it's really important that we strive to master these things in our leadership style, because then others are going to want to follow you and they will respect you. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So the first R is reflection. I mentioned it a bit ago. Great leaders regularly pause to evaluate the decisions they've made. Reflection also provides clarity within your organization. When reflection is one of the core values of your organization, that's where you're going to see real alignment come into play. And how do you do that? Well, what I like to do is have specific questions that I ask myself on a daily basis, or maybe on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. I encourage my other leaders to do the same thing. You can ask yourself a question like this: what did I do well this week, and what can I improve on? That's going to provide you with some feedback sorts of questions. You can also look for that to give you clarity on some of the guidance that you've been offering. So again, I mentioned this earlier, but here's a question that will really embrace and fuel your self-awareness. Will I be proud of myself 5 years from now? Will I be proud of who I've become 5 years from now? So the second R is relationships. We're in a people business, guys and gals. Leadership is about the people. And effective leadership builds trust, and it builds empathy, it builds respect, and it's going to grow the morale of your organization. And as we just think through this, the practical step, as I mentioned a bit ago, is to have one-on-one meetings with your team leaders on a regular basis. Maybe it's not weekly, maybe you just have too many people on your team, but regular one-on-one meetings is important. The third R, as I mentioned earlier, is resilience. Resilient leaders do what? They overcome adversity. They rise up during those times of adversity. What this is going to allow you to do, it's going to allow you to emit grit and leadership and endurance, basically. So true leaders grow stronger through those setbacks. The setbacks are not meant to be obstacles. Instead, they're opportunities for you to learn and to grow. And problems are temporary. Problems are not long-term. Problems are not something that should cause anybody to hit a pause button. Great leaders adapt, great leaders learn, and great leaders emerge even stronger from those difficult times when they are practicing resilience, okay? So you can just ask yourself, what can I learn from this challenge that's going to make me even stronger? The next R is responsibilities. Being responsible means you own every decision that you've made. Whether you win, whether you lose, or whether you learn, basically. You have to not blame other people for some of those shortcomings. When you're a responsible leader, that's what builds trust in your team members. And when you're modeling accountability for yourself and not only judging others, that's where that openness and the consistency is really going to allow you to shine. So when you take those first 4 R's, what that's going to deliver for you is results. And leadership must deliver. Otherwise, leadership isn't true leadership. It's simply doing your job. Success starts with clarity on what the win looks like. How do you track tangible progress? And activity isn't sufficient just to be active. It's imperative that you're not only active, but you're measuring your results. And success comes about via those results, not the busy work. It's being informed, it's having meaningful values that you're focusing on a day-to-day basis. Leadership, as I said a minute ago, will leave a legacy. Lasting leadership's measured by the outcomes, and that's why it's important that we hold ourselves accountable in addition to our team members. I like this question. Are my actions producing measurable and meaningful impact? Are my actions producing measurable and meaningful impact is a great question to allow you to kind of measure yourself, okay? The way I show this on an illustration is I take each of the 5 R's, the first 4, when they're done in the same order that I've gone through them here today, that will equal your results. And that's what we're all achieving, aren't we? Is to be successful. The 5 R equation creates that formula that can be repeated time and time again, that lasting leadership. Each one of those 4 R's builds on the previous one, and they work best when they're integrated intentionally into daily practice. Not every once in a while, not next week, well, we'll do better next month. No, we have to do it on a day-to-day basis. Some people in our work will say, well, but I don't see anything about motivation here. Well, motivation is important when it's integrated with the 5 R's, but what I'm always quick to caution people on is don't allow motivation to turn that scale to something that's out of balance. If all of a sudden you have too much of one R and not enough of another R because you're motivated to do one versus the other, be careful with that, because that can in turn compromise the energy of the group. It can compromise the purpose that you've set out as a team. So motivation is important. There's no question about that, but it's imperative that you use that motivation to drive the results, and you drive the results of doing what? Of taking motivation and merging it with the 5 R's of leadership, okay? But you don't want to take reflection and put it to the third place in the equation. You want reflection to be number 1, because what does that do? That helps you to understand motivation. You want relationships to be second, because that builds on the motivation and the reflection. You want resilience, you want responsibility. And bottom line is motivation and leadership connect to bring out the best in others. That's where motivation really comes into play. So in our business, we've been fortunate for the last few years to be part of a global network of 980 business coaches. And we've been blessed the last 4 years to be named in the top 40 of those globally. So as we look at the business opportunity here, we normally, when we're talking with business leaders or nonprofit leaders, we will ask them this question first. What's your position of market dominance? What's your PMD? And people say, what are you talking about? Well, what is it that sets you apart from your competition is what we want to work on with that prospective client or customer. Because once we begin working together with them, we have a process, an assessment that will help most businesses find anywhere from $50,000 to somewhere over $100,000 of immediate cash flow through this assessment. So as we work through this, people will ask me, well, Randy, can you work with me? And I'll say, only if you're fully committed. Because we do not only generate additional cash flow, but for the long-term benefit, what we're doing is we're generating more leads. We're actually converting those leads into paying clients or customers, which therein delivers more to their bottom line or to their EBITDA if you're an accounting type of person, okay? And we can oftentimes, within that first 12 to 18 months, we've got one business that was 40 years in business when we first started working. We grew their revenues by 61% the first year we were working together. The second year, we grew another 30%. So people will say to me, Randy, how do we do this? And what I have, because you're here today or you're watching a video of this, I've actually have a gift for you. It's an ebook that you can download. The title of the ebook is Integrating the 5 R's into Daily Leadership. It's taking the 5 R's, integrating it into daily leadership. The byline for this is Simple Habits for Extraordinary Leadership. So it's my gift to you. There's no cost for it. You just go to randymortensen.com/5RS, or there's a QR code on your screen that you can go to download that. And I want that to be my gift to you, because one of my favorite stories as I wrap up here is to review my leadership style from 20, 25, 30 years ago. One of the greatest compliments I ever get is when one of my former team members calls and says, "Hey, Randy, can I use you as a reference?" Sure. Or another team member will call and say, "Okay, I'm looking at making a major financial decision, or our company is looking at investing hundreds of millions of dollars. Would you help us?" Yes. The great news is they trusted me then, they still trust me now. If you're a company leader, remember that great leadership is not about being perfect. It's about being intentional. It's about being resilient and purpose-driven. You already have what it takes. Let's go represent leadership at its best. Thank you.